everybody, and welcome to Chris's Chat and Babble, commonly called CC&B, which some of you may know as an Oracle product. Today I've got Matt Gleeson talking to me. Just going to his LinkedIn page to check what he is, and he's now a VP at Oracle Energy and Water. I first met Matt many years ago, 20 years ago, when we were both working for SPL, which was a company prior to being acquired by Oracle. Matt was a project manager back then, and he's risen strongly within Oracle as a VP now. He was a good guy to chat to. Last caught up with him in San Diego in America earlier on this year, and here's what he had to say. Hope you enjoy this. Yeah, first of all, sorry, Matt, how are you? I should ask you that question first.
I'm well, mate. I'm very well, thank you. A surviving winter and looking forward to
of course, yeah. As the world's upside down. Well, we met up with each other when we were out in San Diego, and I can't say the weather was particularly great out there. So was San Diego a successful venture for yourself being there? I mean, it's the first time I've attended.
Yeah, look, Customer Edge has it's taken off for us over the years. I mean, we went from maybe a dozen years ago, we had 20 customers gathered in a room. We now have over 500 gather each year. And to be honest, the year of COVID, when they couldn't be together, they were busting for it to come back on. So it's just taken off again. And what's beautiful about it is, of course, it's customers talking to customers, and the way that they can relay how they're getting the best advantages out of software is one thing, but that's not the biggest thing. It's what are they doing to transform the business? What does it look like for the headwinds that they're facing, and what's it look like for their comparators across the energy landscape or the water landscape?
Okay. So how's COVID affected the industry? Because I see it's been quite different from where it was 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, I think so too. I do think it's certainly changed a lot in terms of workforce engagement. It had the challenge, I think, well, even leading up to 2020, there was the challenge of the aging workforce. It then became even more apparent when the need to be technically apt to be able to stay connected for a year. We really reinforced some things, but it also changed a lot about the way we do things in the energy market, like planning crews. When you had to think about things like, keeping crews separate so that there was no chance of cross-pollination, cross-contamination. It was new dynamics that we hadn't had to deal with before, and that sort of remains in a lot of ways, because there's some really important things that came out of that learning, which was you need to be able to cross-skill. You need to be able to make sure that you have redundancy in capability, and that's not a negative thing. It's actually a really big positive. So it has changed the way that things have happened, and people will reflect back over the COVID years and say, that was a staller for a lot of progress of what we were doing. Now, I think certainly from an environmental perspective, I think it did slow down our focus on climate change, on trying to be as effective as we could with the integration of renewables into the grid, and even water conservation, all of those things, because we were fighting a much bigger fight, it seemed, at the time. So we've got to pick up the pace back into looking after this planet and trying to actually make this energy transition really accelerate, now that we effectively lost a couple of years there of progress we could have made.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, 2 or 3 things there. One, you're talking about the water side. That's what surprised me when I was out in San Diego, is actually how big a problem water is. Everyone's talking about electricity. That's the big headline grabber at this moment in time. Yeah. But potentially, actually, the water side is the bigger. Well, from what I could see, it is as big as a sort of electricity supply side.
So, I couldn't agree more. Yeah. I think there is a future here that we're staring at, and in some countries more than others, where not only the supply of water is being challenged by the fact that there are aging assets out there. There's an inherent loss of what we create that is escaping. But the access to water and to uncontaminated water is a real challenge. And I think this is probably the next 10 years are going to really bring that into, well, I guess into what will be the household dynamics of people's lives. And it's sometimes not until that happens that we start to really focus on these things. And look, if climate change was a peripheral thing in terms of what's discussed around the kitchen table, it probably would never have really pushed itself up in the agendas of corporations, of businesses, and now it's clearly a factor for everyone to be considering, from the energy companies to the transportation companies to anybody engaging a logistics company. It's all round a big factor, and that I think is going to happen with water as well, because we need it for manufacturing, we need it for life, we need it for anything. We need it for electricity production. We can't forget that all these things are intertwined at a point in time.
Yeah, because that was one of the big buzzwords was DERMS. I mean, it sounds daft. I hadn't heard DERMS being described as DERMS before until I got to San Diego, and I was busy scribbling on a bit of paper thinking, what the heck is this DERMS thing? And then quite something there. But this is where I see the world evolving massively. It's always been great having all your ability to produce stuff. So how does going to Oracle, what products has Oracle got that's going to help on that side of things? What is there out there?
Yeah, so the DERMS is a beauty to start thinking about, because one of the things, it's a really interesting space. You've got a massive disruption to what's an established mode of electricity being supplied, transported, delivered, and even consumed by the customer. Very, very, almost it seemed like it was a one-directional flow of supplier to consumer. That's just turned itself on its head with things like PV and even to small-scale renewables in community setups. That changes another level when there's an even greater infiltration of batteries into the home or into basements of offices and the like. And then it changes again when we look at major electrification changes such as transportation, EVs that come into play, or changing over from a dependency on gas to electrification to take advantage of those home generating electricity outputs. So you do all of that, and then you say, okay, well, this thing's now getting to be a big factor. DERMS is the MS part of it is really the key here. It's how do you manage all of this? Utilities have always, forever and a day, built assets, built grids, and then managed them. In this case, somebody else is building that, and somebody else is actually driving the demand for that. And sometimes there's some planning that goes into it from a grid perspective, but mostly it's a reaction. So we've got to find a way to engage the customer in that, because they're now as critical a part as the asset is, as the electron flow is, and as any of the planning can happen. You need to have that customer's engagement. You know that you've seen the floods, you've seen the landslides, you've seen everything that's happening. We are going to have peak events that are going to need us to understand, can we engage that customer to help us at those times? Or at the very least, make sure that we know where there is electrons flowing in the grid, so that we can keep it safe.
Yeah, it's interesting as well, because I was talking to someone else in Australia, and they were saying how that with the advent of PV and the whole sort of being able to almost go down to the municipality side, you then can reduce the number of poles and lines, etc., etc. So actually, I hadn't quite realised what a positive effect. In the UK, we tend to be quite small, and obviously, I'm talking from a UK perspective. When you look at Australia, it's so vast, and the US, the same type of thing. I'd never quite realised what positive effect that can have, and actually the cost savings by installing a massive battery for a town is actually a lot closer than you think. It might look expensive, but the cost of keeping the poles up to get the electricity to that one place of, maybe 50, 100. I don't know
Yeah.
quite what the upper end is, but yeah, it's certainly changing the whole industry, turning things on its head.
Oh,
So
most certainly. Yeah, most
yeah.
certainly. I mean, those long lines and the amount of loss that you do experience across that line. Yeah, I mean, so we're having to generate, and often using coal, having to generate a lot more electricity than actually reaches the target where it's going. So,
Mm.
in far north Queensland, in the centre of Australia, the gap between generation and consumption on a geographical or on a distance travelled can be enormous,
Mm.
and that's not solely Australia. That'll be if you think of any situation where you have an island, a country that's I don't know a series of islands, you have a similar kind of a challenge in trying to reach
Mm.
energy across there. And and some of the solves in the past have been burning oil through diesel generators and other things. These are all things that we can now solve for potentially with something like a battery, and using what happens during the day, either or even in the night. The wind blows at night. If we do it, if we do it well, we can capture it all around the clock.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it changes. I mean, I was quite surprised to find out that there isn't actually, in the US, there isn't a national grid. There's the West
Mm.
Coast, there's the East Coast, and then there's a lot of gap in between that one. And that was quite
Yeah,
a surprise to me. So that's again a challenge for the industry is how
it's
do you do that?
yeah.
I know there's lots of talk if you go on the internet, always a useful source of information there. But
Mhm.
yeah, talking about putting a great big solar panel in the middle of
Yeah,
I don't know, Africa or something like that. But it's great. But then how do you get that power to go somewhere? It's
yeah,
great producing it all in one place, but it's how you then distribute that one. So
yeah.
yeah, I don't think we'll quite get to the point of having container ships that get charged up to then move electricity around. It's in
Well,
theory it should be quite an easy way. So
yes,
yeah,
yeah.
so Matt, how did you get into the industry? What brought you here today?
Oh, well, so I have to go back a bit in time now to think about that, because it's amazing how many iterations of what this industry has been have gone in
Mm.
that period of time. But I first started in utilities back in, well, it was in the 90s. And probably, look, very soon after I started, the biggest thing happening in the IT world and, well, all the world at the moment was the Y2K. So Y2K came around, utilities had old systems. It pointed to a fact that, we had to do something and try and help ensure that there was stability for, well, for the population, for the energy needs, for the water needs of society. So Y2K was a big factor, and it's like, if I just roll through things that happened after that, then you have things like open market contestability rolled in. You had, this emergence of new retailers. You had the sale of major, government-owned utilities off to privatized utilities. These conglomerates, if you will, of
Mm.
energy companies forming around the world. So it's been tremendously evolving and changing the whole energy,
Mm.
and the water markets, and it's a result of that I've probably never thought that I needed to find another industry to keep me entertained. There's always been something
No.
going on to keep the interest levels
So
high.
what year? Because we obviously met first of all through SPL, which was the precursor to being Oracle, the company that was then
Yeah.
bought. So is it just SPL that you work for, or were you somewhere else?
No, so prior to that, I mean, I really have followed data most of my life. In the early days of my career, in fact, my first job after study was in the stock exchange here in Australia, and we were running the settlement system for them, which was tremendously immense data volumes, tremendously mission critical,
Wow.
timeliness, and that, reducing outage periods was of course imperative. That was back in the day on digital RDB and using DEC alpha systems and a whole heap of what would now be archaic, but the foundations of some of the great online transacting protocols that are there today. So. And then from there, doing a little bit of strategic consulting for another organization who were doing something at the time we called hosting. I guess now we'd probably call it cloud. But it was an early generation, SaaS model effectively that we had back there. Until I found my way to SPL, which at a later stage became Oracle Utilities. Who specialised in that space, and since then that's been my life and ambition to make the best of what we do, make the biggest difference out there.
Yeah, we're seeing some people now sort of like move from working in utilities back into big data, but it's so interlinked, isn't it? I mean, particularly, I mean, the thought now of half-hour meter billing and having all those reads, etc. I mean, with all that data, with things like the half-hour meter reads, what's the point of doing it? Why is that really important in the industry?
So I guess it depends where exactly you sit, because there is a different value level around right throughout. From a consumer perspective, and I say for a consumer, and I also say it from the utilities relationship with the consumer. We've gone to 5-minute settlements here in Australia, which is an incredibly short time frame. But even at 15-minute interval reads and the like, what you start to get is a much better profile of usage in a more granular level. We can go from that into understanding, what those energy uses are of an individual. And we spend a lot of time doing disaggregation of energy consumption to help both the utility and the customer understand what's the composition of my bill and how do I make, better energy choices. And indeed, am I using energy at a time when I could be using it in a better model with the utilities' blessing? Because let's never forget that utilities set up tariffs that encourage people to use energy when we want to amortize it across the day. So if we can work together to help showcase that and get that behavioral change in a consumer, it's a benefit for everyone involved. So yes, you can certainly get the value out of a more granular set of data at that level. You can, from a generation and load planning perspective, do a heck of a lot more once we understand down below the feeder level what's going to happen in that energy space. I'm really interested in the future to see how the advent of smart metering or even down to anything less granular than a 3-monthly view of how much water I used will actually change the profile. As we said earlier, I mean, water will be a major challenge in the decade ahead of us. We are going to need to get to a place where we understand fluctuations in usage and what drives it, and that could help us from a perspective of detecting outages even earlier than before, or helping the customer understand if the leakage is on their side of the meter or if it's actually out subterranean, up in about to create a sinkhole underneath the major traffic intersection. So there's a lot that we can certainly expect that level of data granularity could help with. And I think that there are so many cases right now where utilities are just starting to, they're very rich with data, but they're unable to actually wrap their arms around it until now that they've actually been able to embrace things like artificial intelligence rather than entering their data set with a theory of what I'm looking for and exploring that theory and then going on and moving to the next one, a role we called data science for a long time. artificial intelligence changes that so much because it's perpetually learning what to look for and advancing, and finding those things and shaping the parameters it can use to find those things as it's going forward.
Yeah, it's kind of that's I hadn't thought about the AI side of things coming into it. I think obviously ChatGPT's the new buzzword, but obviously it goes a lot deeper. And as you said, analysis paralysis in terms of the data side
Yeah,
is something as well. You've got all this information. It's trying to make sense of that one. But no, I
yeah.
think it's when you go back to things like the water meters and things like that, that was actually how I first started in utilities. It was a summer job installing water meters. And I
Right.
remember in the UK that was quite unpopular because people had always been, they paid a fixed amount a month for the amount of water they were using.
Yeah.
And suddenly by doing this, what was then happening is that we were then seeing the secondary effect of that, which is where people were going, oh, I've just had my water bill through and it's, 10 times what I was paying.
Mm.
And then you find out that, you ask them to switch everything off, you look at the water meter and the water meter's flying around and around and around. And it's like,
Mm.
okay, there's a leak somewhere.
Yeah.
And I think part of that was trying to educate the public to say that the reason that we're doing this is not because it's Big Brother looking, but guess what? You pay for the amount of electricity, the amount of gas, the amount of
Mm.
telephone calls you make. So water's only the next one along. But actually,
Yeah.
it helps the industry understand where that water is going to. Because if you can't sort the leakage out, and like everything, if you
Yeah.
can't measure it, you can't manage it. It's
Yeah.
very
So,
difficult to sit there and say, yeah, we think you're using too much. Well, yeah,
mm.
let's prove it and let's go onwards from here. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
what changes do you see coming ahead in terms of where the industry is going to be? We've seen quite a big change over the last 20 plus years of
Mm.
it. What do you see in the future? Is there anything? What's
Well,
Matt's prediction?
yeah. Yeah.
Aging population,
Well,
aging people in the industry. So what would you tell the next group of guys coming in, guys and girls? Hey, this is what it's going to look like.
Well, I think it'll be good because I figure what we've done, and perhaps it's part of the reason we've had challenges in the water industry and in the energy industry, is we've tried to hire for the skills that are about to retire. Um, and I think what we're going to see in the future is that's a different set of skills. The engagement levels and the ability to drive decision making is going to be much greater at the engineering level, as we'd have traditionally called it in the past. So I think we'll be problem solvers a lot more, and that's exciting for somebody who's come out of building their theory through education and now wants to put it into practice. It could be a really good bastion for us to grow skills in the industry. For instance, products of ours which would have traditionally been in the engineering space, you now have the ability to adapt those using tools like Python and others, and that's become something that people want to get engaged with, and I'm talking the next generation, current generation, and going forwards. So I think that'll be exciting. I think artificial intelligence plays a big role in the future, and what I think that will do is it will actually start to highlight the things that we probably suspect were true, either on the grid or in the usage profiles of customers, or in the performance of our business processes, or whatever that might be. That'll start to really highlight that and shine a light on some of those things in the areas where we can improve. And I think we all go through a process of anticipating where we think the next improvement comes from, but it's done heuristically. So we're always thinking about it from a point of view of, I can observe something, I can make a change. And now we've got this friend that's actually able to do that at a scale that we just haven't been able to, with the data sets that we are, as I say, struggling to wrap arms around.
Is this
So,
O-Power? Is this where O-Power comes into it? Because I find that incredible that
yeah.
the utilities are telling customers how to use less of their product. It's the only, it's the only retail out there where you're trying to say, please use less of us, and
Yeah.
here's the reasons why, and the incentives. I find that incredible, very, very fascinating part of the business.
Well, it is, and of course, you've got that challenge of who's motivated the most to do it. As soon as the motivation for the company that can supply those insights is diminished, then that does change things. But look, we've seen different models. Certainly, with O-Power, I can see energy poverty and the cost of energy for a lot of people, both in where you're living and where I'm living, is a very, very real thing right now. And the cost for a retail company to have a customer go delinquent or to not be able to pay their bills, you've still got as bigger costs involved in trying to manage that as you do as if you could engage them and actually help them through the process, and whether that's figuring out payment cycles for them or even helping them to fit their energy usage within budgets. And that sounds callous, but it's a little bit of the reality of where the energy cost cycles have gone around the planet, around the globe in the last couple of years. So I think that it can play a big role in that. But you need the motivation, and the motivation has to come from government support. It has to come from the way the regulations are built, and also the relationship you want to have with that customer. Because we will have those situations we were talking of earlier where we're going to have times where we want to engage the customer in something that they can elect to do that helps the greater good. And I see people feeding their remaining solar rooftop energy into community batteries that then service the low to middle income users out there, which that's a tremendous way to think of how the energy future could be set up. I think, even things like having the customer willing to phone in and report that they've seen water leakage on the side of the street, or pooling underneath, a tap out at a parkland or something like that. The level of trust and engagement goes a long way to what the costs of running the business can be. So it pays all the returns if you can have a good customer engagement. That is where O-Power really does surface its biggest value.
I was chatting to a guy in San Diego, and he worked for one of the West Coast hydro companies, and he said the problem is the electricity is so cheap. And I was like, sorry, there's a problem? He said yes. He said we now have an awful lot of Bitcoin miners who turn up, because of course electricity is the biggest consumption they have. And he said we also get a lot of marijuana farms going there since it's been legalized. And he said the problem then is that you're then actually trying to persuade the community to use less electricity. But he said when it's 3 cents a kilowatt, he said there's no incentive, because why would Matt decide, I'm not going to switch my hot tub on, I'll keep it off? He said there is an incentive. So I'd never thought about actually cheap electricity can create problems. There's and it really was quite surprising to me. He nearly fell off my chair, because I think at the time we were paying 50 pence a kilowatt. So I converted that to US dollars, and I said, oh yeah, we're paying 80 cents. And he said 18 cents. He said that's a lot. I said no, 80 cents. And yeah, he nearly fell off his seat. So it was quite interesting. It's come down a bit. It's only 30 pence a kilowatt hour here.
It's heading in the right direction.
Well, it's heading in the right direction.
You don't want to go to 3 cents, because then people don't care if they switch the lights off or run the dishwasher in the middle of the night. Those things. Yeah. And it's true of water. I believe that entirely, that water is way too cheap. It certainly is in our country. And that's no criticism. It's just, unfortunately, that's the way it sort of began its life. And you can only inch it up little by little until there's something catastrophic enough that you say, okay, we need to change things here. And the cost of treated water is one of those areas, and I believe it's the same of waste service as well. If we were paying the genuine price that it costs to get rid of waste, we would probably start to think more consciously of what how we could change it. Ultimately, that's what we want people to be thinking about.
Sounds good. All right, Matt. Well, look, I think from my point of view, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciated that. And as I said, it was just a good opportunity to have a catch up. And look, I'll look forward to seeing you. How's the new structure of the business going now? Because there's been a couple of changes within the energy part.
Yeah, look, it's good. I think what we've done is we've figured things out so that the utilities we work with, as well as some of those new entrants, they don't have the problem of having to go to 6 different people to understand what we do. Always been a challenge when you have a big portfolio of capabilities. How do you have one person who can tell the story? I won't say that we've solved it by letting every single person tell the story, but we're improving in that direction, and we've got the experts that they can pull in to help further the story. So I think it's a good transformation for us, and hopefully what that helps is it starts to bring us into mind where problem solving is required, and that's really where we shine, I think.
Yeah. Good chance to use the grey matter.
Of course, I should say.
Of course, yeah, quite right too.
Yes, very unrealistic for me to think it could be done any other way.
Well, there we are. I play a small part in it, but yes, as I say, every little bit helps. So, all right, Matt. Right, you take it easy. Thank you very much for your time, and have a good evening.
Pleasure. Have a good night.
Cheers, Matt. See you later. Bye bye.